I'm Allie, the founder of Glossa, and I am passionate about requirements. Before I jump into the product demo, I want to explain why I'm doing this and why I think that requirements have never been more important than they are right now. AI is changing how we build software and how we implement it, of course. Salesforce vibes, configuration automation, even AI for data migrations. The build side of delivery is getting much, much faster. And that is great. But it means that the bottleneck is shifting. Build and data migration aren't going to be the hardest parts of a project anymore. The old question was, can we build it? I think the new question is, are we building the right thing? And that's a very different problem. I can't say this enough, but it doesn't matter how fast you can build if you are just building the wrong thing faster. That's where I think a lot of the agentic options are headed, quite frankly, if you're not using something like Glossa. And maybe you're thinking, okay, whatever, we built the wrong thing, it almost doesn't matter because we can iterate so quickly. And that is undoubtedly true when you build for yourself. But I don't think that is true when you're doing transformation for a business, for an enterprise where there are a lot of stakeholders, a lot of change management, and trust, credibility, patience, a lot that you can lose if you build the wrong thing, even if you can build another thing quickly after it. As you'll see, Glossa covers only discovery. Once your requirements are excellent, we are done. That means it's really easy to plug them into whatever tool you're using to automate build or hand to a human, and you don't have to be locked into a single way of doing things, especially as these tools are very quickly evolving. Glossa is the heart of your project because good requirements are the foundation of successful projects, and that's only going to be more true in the future. That's my soapbox. Let's talk through the discovery stages of a project from the very first sales conversation all the way through to handing work to developers or to AI agents. A project starts with sales discovery, initial conversations with a prospective client, really focused on value and the business transformation that the project is going to deliver. From there, there's a handoff from the AE to the SE or SA who takes what they heard and writes an SOW. The SOW gets signed, and now there's a handoff to delivery. Part of that handoff is ideally making sure that the delivery team doesn't just know what was sold, but why. The delivery team runs their own delivery discovery that's much more detailed than what happened in the sales cycle. They do a scope alignment check to make sure that what they're talking about matches what's in the SOW. Once requirements are solid, you need client sign off, so getting your client stakeholders to formally review and approve before you start building. And then finally, there's the developer handoff, getting approved requirements into the hands or robot arms of the people/agents who are going to be building it. Although there is variety, every project goes through some version of this, and at every one of these stages, there are places where things fall through the cracks and where Glossa helps. So let's start at the very beginning. So, what happens in a sales conversation? You're talking about the problems that the client has and how your product is going to solve them. These conversations are all about business value. What are the goals the client has for the project? How are they justifying the ROI? What does success look like? From there, you have to write an SOW that typically doesn't talk too much about the business outcomes, but instead describes what's going to be built. From there, you have to write an SOW that typically doesn't talk too much about the business outcomes, but instead describes what's going to be built. So, how do you get from here to there? Traditionally, with a solution architect or a sales engineer who figures out how that business outcome can be delivered by the product. And that's a lot of transition in a really small amount of time, from the business outcomes to what's going to be built, from the AE to the SA or SE, from a conversation to a contract. And what I see is that key information gets dropped even at this early stage. Business outcomes, which would really help delivery, don't make it into the SOW. After this handoff, they typically just disappear. And all the business context that would help the SA or SE draft the SOW gets diminished because the person who's scoping isn't in every single sales conversation. And the pain of this dropped information just isn't felt until later. And so, how does Glossa solve this? Glossa automatically captures all of your sales conversations and extracts both business requirements and business outcomes. That means that business outcomes get defined and preserved throughout the project rather than dropped after sales conversations. And every requirement from sales conversations is captured and traceable rather than only living in the salesperson's notes. So let me show you how it works. First, Glossa connects directly to your meeting and work tools. Meeting recordings flow in automatically, they require no extra work. You can also bring in documents, emails, Slack messages, anything that's part of the conversation. Here, you can see all the sources that have come into this project, call recordings, transcripts, emails. In a real project, most of this flows in through integrations, but you can also upload files manually if you need to. From those sources, Glossa generates structured, clear, and organized requirements. And every requirement can be traced back to its source. So you can see the specific moment in a conversation that resulted in this requirement, and you can play it back right here if you want to, so you can hear the nuance or you can check the context. And if the same requirement is discussed in multiple conversations, all of the conversations are listed here automatically. In addition to extracting requirements, Glossa also extracts business outcomes from your sales discovery conversations. Just like requirements, outcomes are generated automatically. Outcomes have an initial value, a goal value, a status, and context. Plus, you can see the history of every outcome, in case, for instance, the goals of the project change as the project's happening. I'm going to show a little bit more about outcomes later in this video. So having the requirements and outcomes documented and traceable is helpful for getting the SA or SE what they need to write the SOW. But today, writing the SOW is pretty manual. Typically, SAs and SEs are drafting SOWs by copy-pasting from old SOWs, and if they can't find anything in old SOWs that fits, kind of taking their best guess, which means that they're introducing new scoping and new concepts, even if it's something that the business has done before, they just can't find when. So Glossa helps here too. Glossa automatically maps the business requirements captured during sales discovery conversations to your library of standard repeatable work, so it's easy to translate from the client's language to your own, so you can use your own standard language in your SOW. That means that your SOWs are built out of repeatable chunks of work and not written bespoke. This is helpful for SEs and SAs because it makes writing SOWs more efficient, but it is really helpful for delivery teams and the business as a whole, because when your SOWs are made up of repeatable structured work, you can deliver repeatable structured work, which means you can scale. The library is your team's definition of standard repeatable work. This is not a new concept, but there are two things about this library that make it much better than the libraries of the past. First, you don't have to build it from scratch. All you have to do is import a few of your historical SOWs, and Glossa extracts reusable capabilities with scope items, assumptions, and complexity drivers. So your past projects just immediately become your library with no work needed except to review. These are automatically extracted and continuously evolved so that every time you're scoping a project, you're incorporating what you've learned from every prior project. So that's the other thing that's different about this library compared to libraries of the past. Glossa's library learns with every project. It is continuously evolving, it is never out of date, and it never requires manual data entry to stay up to date. So in practice, let's check it out. We previously generated requirements for this project during sales discovery. Glossa has already mapped the requirements to the library, and so you can immediately see what's standard and repeatable, those are the high matches, and then also what's potentially new that you've never done before. When you do have something that should be part of your standard offering going forward, it is very easy to add. Glossa generates a suggested library entry based on the requirement, including scope items, assumptions, complexity drivers, and you review and save it. So the library is a feedback loop, not a static document. Now, all the requirements have been mapped, so how do we create the SOW? I want to be really clear here. Glossa does not generate your SOW. Everyone has their own template, their own language, formatting. Glossa doesn't touch it. Instead, we make it really easy to export all of the capabilities, scope items, assumptions, complexity drivers, and hours for everything in your project. So you take that and you put it into whatever template you use. So now all SOWs are built out of repeatable chunks of work, not written bespoke. And there's one other benefit to this process. Everything is traceable. From the capability language in the SOW, to the library entry, to the requirements that were matched to it, to the specific part of the conversation with the client in the sales cycle, it is all there and it is all auditable. Okay, let's go back to our project phases. The SOW has been created and signed, and now it's time to hand off from sales to delivery. The delivery team needs to ramp up fast on what was discussed and what was committed. They need to understand what the client cares about, what the tricky areas are, what assumptions were made, and ideally they need to do this without making the client repeat themselves, because nothing is worse than when the client says, I already told you guys this, don't you talk internally? So what I hear most often is that delivery gets either a very quick handoff without any detail, or they get a giant collection of meetings and they clearly don't have time to listen to those recordings or read AI summaries for them, and it's not helpful. But with Glossa, the delivery team gets all of the prior context structured in a way that they can understand at a glance. Plus, every requirement is traceable so they can go back and listen to the relevant parts of the relevant conversations. So the context from sales carries forward automatically, and most importantly, it doesn't require any extra work from the sales team. They don't have to do anything for the handoff at all. There's something else that the delivery team inherits that I think is even more important than the requirements themselves. We talked earlier about how sales conversations focus on business value and ROI, and that just kind of gets dropped in the handoff to delivery. Delivery often doesn't even know the goals of the project. They only know what's in the SOW, and so they build to the SOW. But now, delivery teams can deeply understand the business goals of the project, which means they can build solutions that solve the business's underlying problems and not just what they picked up from the SOW and mediocre handoff from sales. Delivery starting their own discovery from a very rich baseline in Glossa. They can have deeper workshops, better stakeholder interviews based on all the conversations that came before. But of course, delivery discovery always surfaces new information. That's why we do it. So we need a way to make sure that those requirements are high quality. Because the whole philosophy of Glossa is that successful projects are grounded in high quality requirements, and every bad project can be traced back to bad requirements. So Glossa prevents three types of bad requirements: missing requirements, misaligned requirements, and misunderstood requirements. Let's go through them. Missing requirements. This happens when a consultant just doesn't capture what was said in a conversation. The same integrations that brought in the sales discovery calls are working here too for delivery. As the delivery team has meetings, they automatically flow into the project, and Glossa creates or updates existing requirements. And because the sales context is already there, the delivery team is building on it, so they're not starting from zero. Glossa also automatically generates user stories and acceptance criteria too. Misaligned requirements. This happens when one stakeholder says one thing and another stakeholder says another, or the same stakeholder contradicts themselves later in the project. Happens all the time. So, Glossa compares every requirement with every other requirement to find contradictions. When Glossa finds one, it explains why it thinks it's a contradiction and it gives resolution guidance. And it's really easy to take action from here too. The most important thing is that you're catching these contradictions early so you can go talk to your stakeholders and figure out what's needed rather than catching it, like, I don't know, during UAT. And you can see the full history, every resolution, who made the call, what the action was, like every part of Glossa, there is full auditability. Okay, and then the final type of bad requirement that Glossa prevents is misunderstood requirements. This happens when your requirements are poorly written, you think it means one thing, and your stakeholder thinks it means another. So, to prevent that, Glossa assesses every requirement across multiple standard criteria. Is it specific? Is it testable? Is it atomic? Is it unambiguous? Glossa tells you exactly why it's low quality and gives you follow up questions that you can take back to the client to make it better. And if you need to go to the client and ask a clarifying question, but you're not quite sure how to frame it, we can help with that too. So you don't have to go in cold. You can go in with specific options to make the conversation more productive. And this is especially helpful if you're newer to this type of project or this industry. It just levels up your whole team. And you don't want to lose the forest for the trees. So for each category of work, using the requirements in each category, Glossa gives you an overall assessment. It tells you the root causes of weakness across all the requirements in this category. It flags requirements that it thinks are missing, and it gives you recommendations for strengthening this area. All of this to make sure that your requirements, that your project is as high quality as possible before you start build. Okay, let's go back to our process. Delivery discovery has created high quality requirements, but you need to understand if you're going to build all that. Clients ask for everything, right? But as one SI leader memorably told me, the budget is the budget. So there are two ways that Glossa helps you understand what requirements are in scope and what requirements are out of scope. First is the traditional way, by cross-referencing the requirements that you got out of discovery with what's in the SOW. Typically, a project manager does this either by hand, line by line, or using ChatGPT. And this is a really important step because it's the definition of how you catch scope creep, which is, of course, how you protect your margin. So it is essential that you do this comparison right and not just, of course, build everything the client asks for. So with the SOW checker, you upload your signed SOW, and Glossa does the comparison for you. It maps every requirement against every SOW line item. Most of your requirements will be matched, but we also flag requirements that don't match to anything in the SOW. These are your scope creep candidates and SOW line items that don't have corresponding requirements. And this has your back in case you forget to cover a whole area of the project in discovery, for instance. If you try to do this with ChatGPT, you're going to run into two issues. First, ChatGPT is just not as careful as Glossa. It just doesn't flag as well as a tool designed just for this. But second, you can run this as often as you want. Glossa remembers the actions that you took earlier, so for instance, confirming a specific match, and only reprocesses the unmatched ones. So you can evolve this as your project evolves. And again, everything is traced, everything is auditable. And ultimately, this helps you protect your margins and align expectations with your client early. But there's another thing that Glossa does that helps you with scoping, and this goes back to the business outcomes that we talked about earlier. In a T&M world, if the client wants something extra built out, like, okay, you're still billing for the hours, but as the industry is shifting to fixed fee and even outcome-based pricing, it is just no longer viable. Everything that isn't ruthlessly serving the goal of the project is eating your margin, which means that the delivery team needs to be able to make calls about what clients request. You know, clients, they ask for everything. And right now, delivery is not empowered to say, does this actually serve one of the outcomes we committed to? Or is this scope creep that we're going to absorb for free? And without a clear connection between outcomes and requirements, they really can't make that call. And that's why in Glossa, we tie every single requirement to a business outcome. Requirements roll up to those standard repeatable chunks of work that make up your library, which roll up to outcomes. So you always know this requirement exists because it's part of this category of work, which is serving this business outcome. And that means that delivery now has something they've never had before, the ability to say no when clients ask for crazy things. When a new requirement comes in, they can see, does this serve one of the outcomes that we committed to? If it does, great, it belongs. If it doesn't, that's a conversation. And it also keeps the business outcomes, the goals of the project, front and center as you're doing discovery. It keeps the project anchored. Let's continue to our next phase, client sign-off. Before you begin build, you need your client stakeholders to review and approve the requirements. Universally, consultants export to a spreadsheet, email it to the client, and get feedback in email threads or Google Sheets comments or worse, track history changes. It is a mess. This is obviously a very critical step, so we've made it easy. In Glossa, you can select the requirements that you want to send and the client stakeholders that you want to send them to. We send them an email with a magic link. No username, no password, no license required. All they have to do is click. The client sees a clean and focused list of the requirements that you've sent them, along with user stories if you generated them, and the client can take a few simple actions: approve, flag, or add a comment. Notably, they cannot edit. When someone approves a requirement, when they flag it, when they leave a comment, it's all recorded on the requirement with who did it and when. It's all auditable, which means that you always have the receipts, and hopefully you never need them. Finally, requirements are approved. Now they need to get into the hands or the robot arms of the people or AI doing the actual build. Most people I talk to are using Jira, so we have a Jira integration. Your requirements, user stories, and acceptance criteria all flow into Jira directly, so you never need to do an import-export. Most importantly, the traceability chain is unbroken. From the original client conversation, through the structured requirement, through client approval, into the developer's Jira board, everything is tracked and traceable. Once your requirements are in Jira, that's your source of truth for developers. Gloss's job is done here. Your developers or your AI agents pick up the work that they already do. They just have really good requirements and acceptance criteria to guide them. So that's the full journey. From the first sales conversation to a developer picking up a Jira ticket. And at the end, you get high quality requirements tied to business outcomes so that no matter how you're building, you know you're building the right thing. I said at the beginning that requirements matter more than ever. And now that we've walked through all these handoffs that Glossa helps with, you know that requirements is a team sport. When you're working on a transformation project and you know you need to build the right thing, you know you need your requirements to be right, you need things that are built for a team. Auditability, consistency, and repeatability across different team members and different projects, and context surfaced when you need it and never, never dropped. The last thing to say about Glossa. If you're watching this, you know the pain of implementations. Implementing Glossa is easy. It is a few questions to get set up, a few SOWs to create your library, and you can be up and running in about 10 minutes. Thanks for watching. I hope this video was very helpful. Let me know what you think. You can email me directly, or you can grab time on my calendar. Thank you.